Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined this morning, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. And we're going to break down NC State's fourth straight win, a 65-62 home victory over Pittsburgh. But before we get too far into this episode, this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there has never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you are guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 five-star reviews. Give Gage Kistner a call today at 480-401-1681 or email Gage directly at gkistner@jfqlending.com. That's GKISTNER@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending, Inc., Equal Access Lender, licensed in over 40 states, www.jfqlending.com. And while you're at it, head over to thewolfpacker.com and use promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial. I'll give you a little teaser. Matt and I just made the hour-and-a-half trip from the Triangle up to go see Breon Pass at Reidsville Senior High play Terquavion Smith and Farmville Central in the third round of the 2A North Carolina High School Playoffs. We've got some great content coming up on the site for that. Some of it's going to be premium, so please be sure to use that promo code PACK60 if you want to get all of the lowdown on what happened in the third round of the playoffs between Terquavion Smith and Breon Pass, fellow 2021 Wolfpack signees. And, of course, you can check out the highlight tape on our YouTube channel now, which, speaking of which, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're watching us on YouTube. Please give this video a thumbs up. And also, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcast apps, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts. Okay, Matt, let's jump into the game. And I guess the main takeaway that I have is, look, it didn't seem right to say that this NC State team is going to go on a four-game winning streak. But if they were going to go on a four-game winning streak, I mean, you almost had to assume that one of them was going to be in a little bit ugly fashion, as was the case on Sunday night. But a win is a win. So do you take more good from the fact that this NC State team has found a way to win an ugly game against a Pittsburgh team that, granted, was missing two of its best players, two double-figure scorers, and Audiez Toney and Xavier Johnson, but nonetheless fought really hard. This Pittsburgh team is always going to kind of have a junkyard mentality about them, and they're never going to go down easy. So do you take more positive away from coming out with the W, or does the negative worry you a little bit just based on, some of the ugliness in this game, the fact that Pittsburgh completely out-rebounded NC State and really held them to a low field goal percentage? It was only the third game this season that NC State shot less than 40% from the field. They finished the night at 39% from the field. So what's kind of your feeling after the game? Matt, you were there at PNC Arena.
Yeah, probably a little more concerned, but I think they won the game just because Pitt was so short-handed, underhand. I mean, they were outmanned. Justin Champagne is a heck of a basketball player, but I felt like the rest of that Pitt team is, they said, quite frankly, a lot of those guys had not gotten significant amount of run, were not asked to play significant roles. I thought NC State did a pretty good job on Champagne. Got to the free throw line and did some damage there. Horton, is that his name, Horton?
Yeah, Ithiel Horton.
Yeah, they did a good job containing him. He was one of the last remaining, if you will, good scorers, and they kind of held him in good. I don't even know if he scored. Thinking back on the game. So, I give Pitt credit. Y'all probably heard me say this.
Matt, Horton had 1 point. You can't forget that. He went 1 of 2 from the free throw line.
Sure. I said this 1,000 times. That sneaky game is the first game when a team plays short-handed. Those first game, maybe first 2 games, are always tricky. They always trip you up. And I thought Pitt did a good job of rallying around each other. You could tell that these were some of the guys that have been kind of itching to get their first chance. They played together. They looked like they had good chemistry out there. They got NC State to play their game. I think Pitt wanted an ugly game, and NC State was forced to kind of play their style and pull it out. But so the good is that I thought NC State's veterans stepped up, rose to the occasion, and NC State win. The concern would be, I'm a guy who, y'all have heard me say this a lot too, I'm leery of freshmen. And my concern would be the off game from the freshmen. Hopefully that is not a harbinger of things to happen. They've been playing pretty well lately. So the hope is that this is a one-game hiccup on their part, and that they'll pick right back up, because they struggled. Frankly, the veterans kind of bailed NC State out yesterday.
Well, I look at the game a little bit differently than you. I agree with your point that it was encouraging to see the veterans step up and find a way to win. But, as ugly as the game was, and you're exactly right that Pittsburgh wanted to make this an ugly game, and mission accomplished. It wasn't pretty basketball. But I take a lot more positive based on the fact that NC State was able to win a game like this. And Kevin Keatts said something really interesting in his postgame availability where he said, we wouldn't have won this game a month ago. And I think he's exactly right. You think back to late January, early February, NC State was in several competitive games. I mean, there was really only 2 games this season in the ACC stretch, the Duke game and the Florida State game, that NC State was not a factor. They didn't have a chance to win in the second half. Every other game, NC State had their opportunities. Just for whatever reason, they kept shooting themselves in the foot. They couldn't close games. They'd go cold. They'd turn the ball over too much. And you got to give NC State credit for only, coming away from this game with 9 turnovers. I mean, Pittsburgh is not they're not an elite team in trying to turn you over, but NC State has had its turnover issues, and the fact that they've been able to string together back-to-back games of single-digit turnover totals tells you that the situation with the turnover problem is improving from where we were a couple weeks ago, where NC State was averaging 19 turnovers a game in that 2-game stretch between Syracuse and Duke at home, both of which resulted in losses. I mean, look, the freshmen did not play well. I think there may have been some dynamic to playing in front of a home crowd for the first time. I mean, I know it wasn't a filled PNC Arena, but you were there, Matt, and from everybody that I could tell that was at the game, they definitely said that it was a much more lively environment. There was some students there as fans. They had the cheerleading squad there. They had some regular general admission fans there due to the new relaxed capacity policies in the state of North Carolina. I think they had you said the marching band was zooming over the Jumbotron. So,
Yeah, they were just playing them on the loudspeaker.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess where I'm going with this is I don't think it's coincidental that the veterans played well in that environment, more like what they've been used to in seasons past at NC State. This is the first time that Shaquille Moore, Cam Hayes, Darion Sebron, and hell, even Ebenezer Duwana are playing 6 minutes in this game. This is the first time that they've played in front of a home crowd other than, their parents and some select family members. So maybe there was a little bit of nerves there, maybe a little bit of, we're just not used to this. They've kind of gotten accustomed to this one environment of playing in front of no fans, and that's been part of the recent push here is that NC State's bench has been a lot more energized. They seem like, you mentioned on the last podcast, the body language has been a lot better recently in this 3-game winning streak. So they just seem to be finding a rhythm, and now there's a little bit of a difference here. We'll see how they respond in the last home game of the season against Virginia Tech, but I take more positive from this game because of the fact that they were able to win. They were able to get their 4th straight win. I think it's the first time they've done it in 2 seasons. And if you were going to have a bad game in this last 3-game stretch, we've talked about plenty, both on the site and on these podcasts, that, look, NC State's tournament chances are still very, very slim. But nonetheless, they are not 0 at this point because of this recent 4-game winning streak. They can still, technically, there is still a pathway to an at-large bid. They're going to have to take care of business in these last 2 regular season games, but the first step was coming out of this game with a win. And they can't play like this up in South Bend on Wednesday, and they can't play like this in Raleigh on Saturday against the Hokies. But, Pittsburgh was on its last leg, and if you could afford a mulligan game, this was the opportunity. So that's why I take more positive away than negative. I do want to talk about one senior, specifically Braxton Beverly. He's really embraced that role off the bench for the 5th straight game. He comes off the bench for the Wolfpack and delivers a great game. 14 points, had the second most points on the team, hit 2 big threes, one of which was a 4-point play opportunity. I believe he also made the free throw. Granted, it made up for the one that he gave up in the first half on, I believe, Nike Sabande. He was trying to close out from a screen, and Sabande hit the 3 from the top of the key, and Beverly fouled him, give him a 4-point play. Maybe NC State could have made a wider gap there in the first half had that not been the case, but Beverly made up for it, and it really seems like his senior presence on this team is working wonders, not just with his contribution off the bench, on the court, but also his kind of mentorship role, if you will, with some of these freshman guards, telling them like it is and talking to them as a fellow player, not necessarily as a coach. Just your thoughts on Beverly's performance as of recently, and I feel like he and guys like DJ Funderburk, they're going to be really, really key here if NC State's going to continue this winning streak and maybe find a way to sneak into the bubble conversation here in March.
Yeah, I thought Beverly was good. He got my player of the game. He'll get my game ball later, not to give that away, but I thought he played really well. Had a good assist on the fast break, made the right decision to give the ball to DJ Funderburk. I thought overall he played one of his better games, season high in points scored for him, 14 points. All the veterans played real well. It goes back to the original point I made. I think Funderburk had 13. Jericho Helms had a double-double. And I'm leaving Manny Bates. Got 10 points. He's been knocking on the door at double figures. He had scored 8 or 9 points, I think, in 5 straight games. Finally got back into double figures. Also had 6 block shots. This game was...
No assists, though. I was getting used to these three assist games from Manny. I mean, I guess you can't expect it every night, but it's been nice to see.
Yeah, he was he was a fourth down. Look, they played 4 veterans and they played 4 freshmen. The nitpickiness, you could say, with the fouls on Funderburk and Bates in the first half. They both had 2 fouls, which forced Ebenezer Dewana to get in the game. Dewana didn't necessarily excel, but did his job, I guess. What the expectations were. I would go circle back to one thing real quick with the freshmen. Yeah, it was definitely a crowd there, so maybe that played a little bit. That shouldn't have been any different. That was a high school crowd, so they should have played in front of something like that before. Now, maybe being a college versus high school different. I think Pitt deserves some of that credit, though, because they mixed up the defenses. They were playing that zone defense. They were playing very physical. I kind of wonder if that would throw the freshmen off a little bit more than anything. But, like I said, the good news is, to me, the big positive you take away is that the veterans did what the veterans did. If they're going to make a run in March, we're in March 1st. If they're going to make a run in March, it's going to have to be on the backs of the veterans with help from the freshmen. It can't be the freshmen leading the way. So as much as we like to talk about these freshmen, whether or not they're playing well, and that's me, I talk about it all the time, the ultimate success level of this team is going to be dictated by the veterans. They're going to have to lead the way. The guys like Beverly and Funderburk and Bates and Helms. And how they do in March will probably tell the tale. And whether or not they get, but they are going to have to get support. They did not get much support against Pittsburgh, but they were able to beat Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh wasn't a very good team. Played hard, played physical, dictated style, pace, tempo, the whole 9 yards, but they just were short on talent. And NC State was able to beat them. To your point, they cannot play like that against Notre Dame and certainly Virginia Tech or in the ACC tournament and expect to win games.
Well, I'm trying to give the freshmen a little bit of a pass here, and I think they've deserved a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because of their play recently. So they had a mulligan opportunity. Let's see how they bounce back this Wednesday before I'm ready to get too concerned about the freshmen. Jericho Helms, you mentioned his double-double. It was a quiet double-double, but, what was even more impressive from the front court production, and Pittsburgh ends up slightly beating NC State points in the paint. I think they outscored them by 2 points in the paint. A lot of those points in the paint for Pittsburgh were just second-chance opportunities. They had 20 offensive rebounds, which was really probably the most troubling of the takeaways from NC State's perspective of this game. But, Funderburk and Bates were both in foul trouble. Funderburk fouls out of this game. He only plays 23 minutes, but 13 points in 23 minutes. It's pretty darn efficient. And then Manny Bates, he still plays 32 minutes, but he finished with 4 fouls. That takes away from some of the aggression as, he played some stretches without having to foul or, Keats left him in that first half in the last 6 minutes of that game, in the last 6 minutes of that first half. Keats left him in with 2 fouls, so Bates really had to, be smart and not pick up a third foul before the second half, or NC State could have been in some real foul trouble. There was a lot of fouls in this game. I think it was 46 total, and there were a total of 64 free throw attempts in this game. NC State had 34, Pittsburgh had 30, and NC State was able to beat Pittsburgh by 5 points on the free throw line. NC State finishes with 24 free throws, Pittsburgh finishes with 19, and that's really the difference. So another encouraging sign. NC State shot 71% from the line. That's about average for this team, about on par with what they've been shooting this season. But at least they made enough free throws. At least that wasn't something that they left on the table, because had they not made more than 70% of their free throws, it could have been a different outcome. But, I don't want to overanalyze this game. It was an ugly win, but it was mission accomplished. So I think, unless there's anything else that you really want to touch on here, and we'll have more coverage, this week about what NC State needs to do if they want to remain in the bubble conversation. Spoiler alert, keep winning. But I think we can jump into game balls unless you've got another point you want to make.
Yeah, just, and just to be clear so we're not misleading, they're not really in the bubble conversation now, but to get into the bubble conversation, as you were saying, can't lose. And that's the bottom line of this game, that they didn't lose. We said, both of us have said that when you talk about margin for error for NC State, there is none. 0. Next loss is an eliminator, aside from winning an ACC championship for NC State from the NCAA tournament. I thought you wrote a great column last week, which subscribers can read, about how the ACC has been letting down NC State, and that trend continued over the weekend. So it's really just not a lot of great opportunities. These last 2 games, Notre Dame tumbled out of quad 1 status and will not get back.
Notre Dame, what the hell are you doing losing to Boston College?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to, look, BC's first game was out 3 of their top 4 scorers. What happened? They rallied together. They chalk it up to another example of what I'm talking about. Virginia Tech was going to be a quad 2 game at home. So, they just don't have a lot of opportunities until you get to the ACC tournament, which is why 0 margin for error. And they survived and advanced, for a lack of a better way of putting it, and they move on to another opportunity to keep playing for something, which is ultimately what this is all about.
Well, thank you for your kind words on the column. I can tell you that it didn't feel like a good column when I was writing it, because as I talked to you off air, mentioning the quad 1, quad 4, typing that up multiple times in a column, it makes your head spin. And you're like, is this even going to be readable? But if you want to check that out, use promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on the Wolfpacker.com. You can check it out. I believe it's NC State is surviving and advancing, but the ACC isn't helping. And we'll see. Maybe ACC can help out a little bit this week. It looks like Georgia Tech is sneaking into the conversation. I believe they were one of the last 4 teams in as of Monday morning, according to Joe Lunardi at ESPN. So that makes 7 ACC teams that would make his tournament field. We'll see. Duke's also in the conversation. Syracuse is playing their way out. NC State, as we've mentioned, these next 2 games are not going to get NC State into the tournament. They have to win them to stay alive. And then once they get to Greensboro, there's a high chance that, that's the problem with the ACC right now. There's only 2 teams, I believe, in the top 30 of the net, which means there's only 2 teams that you can pick up a quad 1 victory with a win at home in the ACC out of the 15 teams there. But I believe there's 9 in the top 50, which when you're on a neutral court in Greensboro, that gives you a lot more opportunities to pick up some quad 1 wins, which is exactly what NC State needs. They only have 1 right now. They're probably still going to only have 1 at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, definitely will only have 1 at the end of the regular season. There's no hope for, it would take Notre Dame blowing out NC State, and then I think they play Florida State in their last game and beating them by a good margin. Just to give some perspective, NC State fell in the net after it beat Pittsburgh by 3 points. We've gotten to the point in the net where wins and losses don't move the needle as much as so much as the margin. Real quick, only 6 teams in the top 50 in the ACC right now.
For so the net. That number has gone down.
Yeah, Syracuse and Duke dropped out of the top 50. And you mentioned Georgia Tech moving up. That doesn't really help NC State as much because NC State doesn't play Georgia Tech. It would help if they got Georgia Tech in that first game of the ACC tournament because Georgia Tech is 40th right now in the net. And so it's one of those rare situations where for NC State, in the hypothetical world, if you win your next 2 games, you want the most challenging path possible in the ACC tournament because you need at least 2 wins. So you want the most challenging path possible to give you the most opportunities, and that would probably involve Georgia Tech in that potential first round because if they got up to the 8-9 game, it most likely would be either Georgia Tech or Duke. You'd rather play Georgia Tech in this situation. As of now, we'll see what happens. Georgia Tech plays Duke. Maybe that'll change. But Duke is 59th in the net. And at this point in the season, that's a challenge to get back up 10 spots over the next week.
Well, they've got 2 opportunities. They have 2 quad 1 opportunities to finish out their regular season. So presuming they win both, they can certainly play their way into that top 50. They go on the road and play Georgia Tech on Tuesday. Then they play Carolina in the last game of the regular season on Saturday in Chapel Hill. So,
but this is where this point in the year where it's just hard to move. I'll give you an example. NC State beat Virginia on the road and only moved up 2 spots the next day. So it's hard to get that kind of jump. If you win both, maybe, but it's going to be pushing it for Duke.
Fair enough. NC State fans, if you're already looking at the ACC tournament, and I know how a lot of NC State fans are, I guarantee you a lot of people listening to this podcast right now are looking at the ACC standings this week. They're looking at their bracket. They're thinking, okay, what should we be rooting for NC State to be? Do we want NC State to be a 10 seed? Do we want them to be an 8 or 9 seed? You definitely want them to be an 8 or 9 seed. If they're the 10 seed, presuming all the ACC teams go to Greensboro, none of them opt out. I know there's been a lot of external conversation, but as we get closer to March, it seems like all 15 teams are going to be in Greensboro. That 10 seed has to play on Tuesday. That's not going to help NC State at all. If you can get into that 8-9 game, you get the bye from the Tuesday game, you're going to have a most likely quality opponent in that first game, whether it's Duke or Syracuse or Georgia Tech, who knows, most likely Georgia Tech or Duke. And then if you win that game, you're setting up a date with Florida State. You beat them, then you become the 1 seed. Basically, you get the 1 seed's path. So, anyways, we'll have a lot more on the Wolfpacker.com. So check
First
that
thing
out.
first, beat Notre Dame, right?
Right. Just NC State, if they should not be thinking, the players, the coaches, they should not be thinking about anything like this. They should not be doing these scenarios. They should just be focusing on the game in front of them, as I'm sure they are. That's kind of how players and coaches are, even if maybe they secretly are looking at things online and they just don't want to say. But let's do our game balls and wrap this up, Matt. You've already given who you're going to give the game ball to, but give the defense of why Braxton Beverly, because I would have picked him if you didn't.
Right, scored 14 points. When NC State was playing his best, Beverly was on the floor. That's just the bottom line. He went to the free throw line 9 times in this game. Got fouled twice on 3-point attempts, made one of them. That was tied for a career high trips to the free throw line. And for a young man who had kind of been struggling at the free throw line this year, he was clutch. He made 8 of 9. I would venture to say the last 4 games, this is more like, I think, the Beverly that Kevin Keats was hoping to see this year. He's embraced that role of being one of the top, a reserve off the bench. He played a little more minutes against Pittsburgh, probably because Seaborn and Moore were struggling a little bit. But kind of playing that 20 to 25 minutes per game is kind of the sweet spot. And, I just thought that he's been clutch, and apparently he had a nice line about fans heckling Pittsburgh players after the game. So he seemed to be in a good mood and enjoying himself.
Yeah, it's in my post-game notebook if you want to check that out on the Wolfpacker.com. But that full quote on Beverly and his experience talking to the Pittsburgh player about what the fans were saying in the crowd, that's at the bottom. So check that out on the Wolfpacker.com. And I don't discount that Beverly and Funderburk are kind of having their senior moments, if you will. I think they're starting to come to the realization that, these are their last few games in an NC State uniform, presuming that they're going to go ahead and move on and not elect to take that extra year that the NCAA has granted. Any of the seniors could technically come back, but I think it's unlikely for any of them. And that was their second to last game in PNC Arena if they move on after this year. So I think that's starting to set in a little bit, but I'll give my game ball to Jericole Helms. I think you have to. I mean, he's had a double-double, 15 points, 10 rebounds. He led the team in both categories, 2 offensive rebounds at that. He also led the team in assists, 5 assists. And you look at those 2 guys, Braxton Beverly and Jericole Helms, they tied for the lead with a +5 rating, both respectively. In terms of plus-minus efficiency for the game. So when they were on the court, NC State was winning by 5. Jericole Helms gets my game ball. He always seems to play pretty well against Pittsburgh. There's something about that NC State-Pittsburgh matchup. There's a lot of verbal back and forth. It's always a physical game, but for whatever reason, NC State has had Pittsburgh's number. Kevin Keats is now 7-0 against the Panthers in his first 4 seasons with the Wolfpack. And it doesn't seem likely that they're going to meet in the ACC tournament, so that should hold true throughout the rest of the season. But for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams. Let's wrap this up. Use the promo code PACK60 on the Wolfpacker.com for a free 60-day trial. Please rate, subscribe, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Follow us on social media. You can follow our main account at the Wolfpacker. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. Give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. And again, for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.